This is part two of the story behind the Volkswagen Beetle, the car that survived war, destruction, and political collapse to become one of the most iconic automobiles in history. In the first part, we talked about Hitler, Ferdinand Porsche, stolen patents, and the dark origins of the Beetle. But now it's time to see how this failed propaganda project somehow became a global automotive legend. In total, the KdF-Wagen had around 30 different modifications: open-body versions, closed-body versions, stab vehicles, and even amphibious variants. But besides the fact that instead of producing a peaceful, cute little Volkswagen Beetle, this factory was building military vehicles, it was also constantly filled with prisoners of war who were essentially forced into slave labor. They were assembling one of Hitler's most important weapons, the V1 rocket. The name literally meant weapon of vengeance, and the main feature of it was that it was remotely guided, making it almost impossible to track where the rocket had been launched from, and most importantly, impossible to predict where it would hit. And this weapon could have seriously influenced the outcome of the war, but the Allies reacted quickly. They figured out where these rockets were being produced and bombed the facilities to hell. London suffered the most simply because it was nearby. Around 2,500 of these rockets landed in London alone, while roughly 10,000 were launched toward England overall. We all know how World War II ended, and by the end of the war, the Volkswagen factory was lying in ruins. There was absolutely no talk about producing the Beetle, a people's car, or some kind of global automobile anymore. The remains of the factory ended up under British control, and honestly, they had no idea what to do with it. But by some almost magical coincidence, the factory, despite being destroyed, still contained blueprints and several surviving prototypes. They were damaged, but still intact enough to be found by the British. The British then decided to restore them a little and show them to their military. And the military appreciated the design because what Porsche had originally built into the car, reliability and ease of repair, was extremely valuable for the army. The very first major order the Volkswagen factory received after the war actually came from the British Army. They wanted 20,000 Beetles. The restoration of the factory was unbelievably difficult, but by 1947, orders from other countries slowly started coming in. And this is where the British and Americans made one of the dumbest mistakes in automotive history. As soon as the factory was barely back on its feet, crooked, broken, but functioning, they tried offering it to basically everyone as part of war reparations. They were practically saying, "Please, just take it. We don't need it. Maybe you can at least take it for debts or something." And both British and American car companies refused. They all thought it was worthless junk. Ford, specifically Henry Ford II, who was leading the company at the time, reportedly said the entire factory wasn't worth a damn. And today, that worthless company became one of the largest automotive groups in the world. And if Ford's leadership hadn't made that mistake, all of this could have ended up as a single company. Imagine how ironic that would have been. The company that inspired Hitler to create the people's car would later own the result of that idea. But history doesn't work with what-ifs. In 1949, since nobody wanted the factory, the British handed it back to West Germany. By that point, the plant had already been run for about a year and a half by Heinz Nordhoff. Together with his team, Nordhoff rebuilt the factory from ruins. By 1961, the factory had already produced its millionth car. And in 1972, just 27 years after the end of World War II, production of the Volkswagen Beetle surpassed the legendary Ford Model T, making the Beetle the best-selling and most successful car of its era. Even today, the Toyota Corolla technically holds the top spot, but Corolla has gone through countless generations. The Beetle, meanwhile, remained fundamentally the same car for decades. That's why, personally, I believe the Beetle is one of the most recognizable and coolest cars ever made, and definitely one of the most fascinating stories in automotive history. So in the end, yes, the history of Volkswagen truly began with theft and deception. First against Czechoslovakia, and then against the people of Germany, who collectively paid for a car many of them would never actually receive. A lot of them probably didn't even live long enough to see the Beetle enter real production because of the war and the division of Germany into East and West. And by the way, Volkswagen only compensated citizens of West Germany. East Germans received nothing. Porsche himself also didn't behave perfectly during the creation of this car. But despite all of that, today we're left with one of the largest and most successful automotive corporations on the planet. And honestly, I do think Volkswagen makes some of the best cars in the world. After Honda, of course. And yeah, that's the story. That's why I wanted to share it with you. Now, I really want to know what you think about all of this. Did you find it interesting? Did you already know this story? And I'm not afraid to say it. The Beetle is truly one of the icons of automotive history. It's one of the cars that helped shape the automotive world we know today, because it was one of the first true people's cars. And when it comes to the Ford Model T, which many consider the first true people's car, I'm honestly not sure it's that simple. I can't say definitively that the Beetle was more people-oriented than the Model T, but at the very least, the Beetle was conceived as a social project from the very beginning, despite all the darkness surrounding World War II. The Beetle was originally intended to be a social project, a car for the people. The Model T, meanwhile, was primarily a business project. And yes, car companies today are mostly just businesses. But throughout history, there have actually been many cars created as social projects, and automotive history is far more complex than most people realize. So thank you very much for watching this video, and thank you for making it all the way to the end. See you in the next video.